Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted and privileged to welcome a very senior, respected, and accomplished professional, a fellow YPO member from Bangalore, India, Mr. Samir Inamdar. Samir, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Samir is an investor, a strategist, a mentor, a speaker, and a board member. He's the co-founder of MD. He's the co-founder and MD and CEO of Forum Synergies India Private, and which is the private equity fund managers. And as I just mentioned, he's a fellow member of the YPO from India. So, Samir, let's start with your own journey. What did you do right to make it to where you are? And all of us come from middle-class families.
Yeah, thanks, Ashutosh. Yes, it's been quite a journey. So actually, I started out in a small town in Madhya Pradesh called Gwalior, and this was 60s and early 70s. In those days, the small town was very, very different from metros. Unlike today, that kind of a difference, they're kind of merging.
Absolutely.
But when I got kind of sent out to Mumbai at a very short notice when I was 13 years of age. When I landed in Mumbai, I was really not ready for it. And it was like a cultural shock. It was a cultural shock. In Gwalior, I used to top my class. I was one of the star players in cricket and so on, right? And I was in the so-called English medium. When I got to Mumbai, English medium was something else altogether. I couldn't speak a word of English. I had no chance of getting into my school cricket team. And most importantly, I was no longer top of the class. So it was like a culture shock. And but anyway, I eventually got scraped through into engineering. And then, of course, I went into IIM. And then kind of starting to build confidence. But frankly, I was always low on confidence because of the issues, or rather the situations I had gone through. So, looking back now, I think the journey has been helped by the way I looked at leadership. So there is, there's a lot of talk about leadership and a lot of management jargon about leadership. But I do believe that leadership is not only leadership of others. It has to start with leadership of self.
Correct.
So to begin with, I would say there are three levels of leadership. There could be level 4 and 5 also, but we'll come to that. So level 1 is leading yourself. How do you lead yourself, and how do you prepare yourself for bigger things? Sincerity, honesty, hard work, getting the right values in yourself, putting nose to the grind, learning to do very, very, kind of tough jobs.
Yeah.
That's level 1. Level 2, then you come to a situation, even career-wise, right? You are initially an individual contributor only, then you come to a team leader kind of a situation. So level 2, in my opinion, is a leadership where you're leading a team, right? And then a different dynamics comes into play. How do you handle a team? How do you attract talent? How do you retain talent? How do you motivate people? I talk about tantalizing targets, and that's a subject altogether. Yeah. We can talk about it some other time. But how do you set tantalizing targets? How do you reward? And most importantly, how do you give credit but take the blame if there is some blame to be taken? Dispute resolution, so on and so forth. Leading by example. And only then do you get to the level 3 leadership, which is the business leader, leading a business, right?
Yeah.
And that's when you start to get into a number of things that generally the leadership professionals talk about.
Yeah.
So for me, since you talked about the journey that I had, this was really the journey. From a small town, learning to live in a metro, learning to live in a westernized environment, and then trying to make a mark. So when I came out of IIM, I had a vague vision of, I should be a CEO before I'm 40, and actually beat it by 1 year. So that really was the journey, Ashutosh.
And which were some of the companies you worked for?
So I started my career right out of my engineering, which was from Bombay University. Incidentally, like I said, I scraped through into engineering, but
You've been
simply,
very modest, but okay.
and eventually ended up in the honors role in Bombay University.
Ah.
I joined as graduate engineering trainee in what was then called Telco, today called Tata Motors in Pune, in Pimpri.
Yeah.
So then went to IIM. After that, I was with Maruti for more than a decade.
Okay.
And at that time, Maruti was very, very early. I joined Maruti when it had not even produced 1,000 cars in all.
Amazing.
And that was a tremendous experience because Maruti was this revolutionary management company in the country, apart from being, really revolution in automotive and so on and so forth. And then after that, I was the CEO for South Asia for Tyco Electronics, which is today called TE Connectivity.
Yeah.
And then I went on to GE. So I was running one of the GE businesses for South Asia.
Amazing.
So those were that was my corporate journey, and then of course I came out and started on my own private.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I've often asked leaders like yourself is that, and when I'm sure this must be stage 4 and 5 of leadership, which you may want to, which you were referring to, but scaling up a business is a very different experience from creating a new business, and you seem to have done both. What, in your view, are some of the key differences in the two, and what are the kind of people, competencies, experiences that you need to be mindful of?
Yeah. So before I come to the question, Ashutosh, since you mentioned, let me just very quickly touch upon level 4 and level 5, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's simply level 4, you go beyond business and you talk about leadership of community. And it's more like in YPO, right? It's more leading a set of equals. So it's much more difficult. And then, of course, you go on to leading a country, which is, that's another kettle of fish altogether. That's level 5. That's just my definition. Okay, so But coming back to your question, I mean, I think your question was about scaling a business, right? So in Tyco, for example, when I joined Tyco, we were a small business in India. We just started up. And there was a lot of autonomy on what we could do, and there was a lot of freedom on what we could do. We were really not a blip on the global radar, so we could pretty much do it. But we were supported. So there was a great amount of freedom, and we did. We set up new plants, we acquired companies, we did joint ventures with companies, and grew very, very rapidly. So that's a phase where it's a mega growth phase, and that's where people that you want are people who are kind of go get it kind of attitude and are willing to be very entrepreneurial in their thinking, very aggressive. I always made the distinction to my team that I would like to be aggressive without being abrasive.
Right.
There is a lot of negativity around the word aggression, but I believe aggression per se is not an issue. If it generates abrasion, that's really what the issue is.
Well said.
So those are the kind of people. But once you start scaling, which is where when I moved to GE, that was a very different environment. And that's when systems, processes, the discipline of following the processes, all those things come in, right? The ability to network with people, and so on. So it's a very different DNA that you're dealing with, both yourself as well as in your team, in the two situations.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And if you were to build a team, and you've worked with multiple teams in different, in Tata Motors or Telco, in Maruti and Geico and GE, and now your own business or your own company. Given today's circumstances, where you've got pandemic, you've got work from home, and so many other variables, the Great Resignation, what would you look for in the people you want to hire?
Yeah, good question. Because as we speak, I'm engaged in hiring for the companies I'm on the board of. In one case, a CHRO; in the other case, a CFO. And we just a year ago we finished a hire of a CFO. CEO. And in the current situation with pandemic, with the so-called hybrid working and so on and so forth, I think it's very important for people to be, let's say, be self-starters. The days where the team leader or the manager is going to give you a task and you're supposed to do it and he'll check. I think those days are well behind us, right? So one has to look for people who are self-starters. Obviously, the basics like sincerity, hard work, honesty, integrity, that goes without saying. In fact, it is even more important because if you're not face to face, if you're not in your office, right, you're working from home, that is even more important. So how do you judge while recruiting those issues? People need to be self-motivated. People need to be self-starters. They need to be good communicators because if you're in an office environment, you're bumping into your colleagues all the time. Communication and setting up relationships is that much easier. But how do you do that remotely? It's not just the question of today's working from home or digital working or remote working. It is also when you're even earlier before the pandemic, when there are distributed teams across geographies, right? So there is a CHRO that we are looking for now. And how does the CHRO make sure that the motivational levels, inspirational levels, they are managed across different geographies? So that's, again, communication becomes very, very important. So those are I don't know whether I answered your question.
No, you have. But I think, you have. My next question and next few questions relate to valuations and money. But before I get there, let me start by asking you to tell us about Forum Synergies India, which are private equity fund managers. And then that will flow into the other questions.
Sure. So I'll take a step back. I'll start with why I got into it. Okay.
Yeah.
So I was in GE, and before that, so I'd spent kind of more than a decade being the CEO of businesses of multinationals, right? And one of my friends says that if you're leading a South Asia business in a multinational, then you're the emperor of the 11th moon of planet Pluto in the solar system. Okay. Of course, this was 15 years ago, and now things are changing. India is much more on the radar. But I'm talking about early 2000s, even late 90s, and we were a blip. And like I said earlier, in Tyco, we had a lot of autonomy. We did a lot of stuff. But when I came into GE, I found there's a lot of there's not much elbow room to do your own thing. If there's a process, there was a process, and this is the way we do it here, kind of a syndrome in GE. And I'd spent more than a decade doing what I was doing, and I decided that I've had enough. I need to do something more. It so happened that I got introduced to what is private equity. Until then, believe me, I didn't know what private equity or venture capital was, right? Because I interacted with a private equity company who wanted to hire me. And then I felt, incidentally, you are a YPO also, and in YPO, we have this concept of a forum, right? Who are all CEOs, who are all high achievers in different fields and so on. And a thought came to my mind that this is a team which has incredible amount of talent and experience, right? So why don't we kind of leverage that to create a private equity fund where we invest into different companies and help them grow, help manage them, right? And the kind of talent that helps. So I proposed that to my forum, and my forum immediately agreed and said, "You get into it, and we'll all support you." And that's how the name came. Is Forum Synergies. And that's how we started. Unfortunately, though, we set up the company 1 month before Lehman Brothers collapsed, and that's that kind of delayed our journey. But yes, it has been a very, very nice and eventful journey where we set up the fund. We invested in a number of companies. Our main focus was manufacturing, engineering, but also tech. Some tech companies we invested into, and so on. And today we are in the phase of exiting from these companies.
Wonderful. And what do you look for before you make an investment?
Yeah, I mean, that's a key question, right? Every time you're investing from a fund.
Correct.
First of all, as a fund manager, it's a huge responsibility because you're managing other people's money, right? you cannot take that lightly. Definitely not, right? So you have to do a tremendous amount of due diligence. What do you look for? I think there are 3 or 4 things which are critical. Number one is the market size. Uh, there are many times there are businesses which are great businesses, but they are solving a problem in an area, in a market segment which is very narrow and small. It's very difficult to build large businesses in a small market, right? It's very difficult to be a large fish in a small pond.
Right.
So market size, is it large enough? That's point number one. Point number two, whatever is the technology or the product or the solution that the company has, what is the quality of it? What is the robustness of it? What is the sustainability? What are the moats around it? What are the other competitive solutions? Right. That's number two. Number three, which probably is the most important thing at that point, is the team or the entrepreneur himself. Uh, we I have always been very, very particular. Including my partners, we all have been very, very particular that we get the right value systems. We judge the entrepreneur whether he or she has the right value systems and the right ethics. Because if that is not there, then it's absolute no go, right?
Correct.
Like in GE, we used to say, one strike and you're out. You don't get the second chance on these kind of things, right? So what kind of team, what kind of entrepreneurs they are, capability, their perspective, and so on. But one more very, very important thing is, how do you exit? So as an individual, when you're investing in a company, this is not really something that you need to worry about. But as a fund, you have to exit. So it might be a great company, great business, great scaling probability. But if there is no exit route, then you don't want to invest. So you have to look at exit route. I'll give you an example. If you're investing in a hardcore engineering business, right? Relatively speaking, it's very difficult to exit because there are very few funds who understand it. There are very few investors who understand it. Then you're restricted to strategics. And the strategics you're talking about maybe 4 or 5 in the world, right? So how do you exit? And is it easy to find exit 3 years down the line, 4 years down the line? And at that point, what will be the situation of the market segment, of the playing field? That is what is. So those are the 4. So those are the 4.
And absolutely great points, all of them. I mean, I'm sure everyone's going to be listening to all your words of wisdom. But moving on now, Samir, one of the questions that is often asked, especially when it comes to startups, who knows how to value a company better? Is it stock market or private equity? Because there are some companies which are incredibly valuable, and yet they don't seem to be making any money at all.
Yeah. So Ashutosh, these kind of questions don't have a single answer.
I know.
Right? But I will lay out the way I see both the pros and cons.
Correct.
Right? So stock market tends to be much more fickle, much more short-term oriented. So I worked in a company which was listed, and so stock market is something where people are living from quarter to quarter. In fact, for people who know Hindi and who know Hindi films, I call it QSQT. You probably know the reference of the Hindi film. It's not Qayamat se Qayamat tak. I'm referring to quarter se quarter tak.
Quarter se quarter. Okay.
That's the kind. You are forced as a CEO of a listed company. You're forced to be much more cognizant of the next quarter and this quarter, and you're as good as your last quarter, right? So that drives a certain kind of behavior where it is very difficult to build a sustainable, robust business built to last, so to say, right? If you're already that, then that's a great thing, because then the investors in the market is valuing you very well. But if you're wanting to build it, it's a little bit difficult, right? On the other hand, venture capitalists or private equity capital, it's much more patient capital, right? They don't look at quarter to quarter. They would much rather have a 3-year plan and maybe the timelines are as much as 5 years. Sometimes VCs are happy to be invested even 7-8 years before exit. So it's a much more patient capital, and therefore the ability of venture capitalists or private equity players to be nurturing a business for the long term, right? It's much better. Valuations are both based on EBITDA or earnings, and but I would say the market probably, given both equal, right? Market would probably value it better, because shoots bar is something that market goes for much more than venture capitalists would really drive a hard bargain. And I better say that because I'm supposed to be doing that, right? But yeah, I think that is true. If you look at this thing, so I think generally speaking, let's say horses for courses. It's not a single answer.
Sure.
There are benefits of both. If you want to raise the next round of capital, market is much easier, right? In venture capitalist or in private equity scenario, there's a lot of hard work you need to do. So there are pluses and minuses on both sides.
And a follow-up question to that is that, when you look at the traditional family houses in India, they've built massive assets, physical assets. And along comes this young startup who has a promise of future performance and is now valued at 20 times this 100-year-old company. How does one reconcile the huge difference that has started to creep in between asset-based profit-making companies and the so-called tech stocks?
So, see, firstly, it is supposedly driven because of expectations of return. And given where the entire business environment expected to grow, to go to in, let's say, next decade, the expectations of return are more for these kind of digital businesses, digital native businesses, than for legacy businesses. But that's just expectations. But the movement, see, the traditional family asset heavy businesses that you talked about, if they are standing still, then they deserve the low valuation as compared to, of course, compared to the tech businesses that they get. But they are also not standing still. They are also changing and reforming themselves with the technology, with the market situation that they find themselves in. They are also digitalizing their processes, systems. They are also digitalizing their go-to-market and customer connect, right? Once that starts to happen, I think those businesses, and there are examples that you see that a lot of traditional family business, I don't want to name them, but their valuations have been seeing very strong uptick. But it's all to do with how you handle the business. It's not to do with how old your business is or how capital heavy you are. It's to do with what you do with it. Whatever you have, how do you handle it?
Wonderful. And my last question to you now, Samir, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your own amazing journey that you've had, and you've done so many different things, and now you're an entrepreneur yourself, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away from your journey and from our conversation?
Very good question, Ashutosh. Thanks for asking it, because it makes me think also. It's always very important to take kind of a step back and look at things with a wide-angle lens, so to say, right? Because you're always using telescopic lenses. You need to do that once in a while.
Correct.
I think what my career and what my journey has taught me is that balance is critical.
Right.
Balance in different contradictory, let's say, trends or forces, right? So look at balance between, let's say, ambition, soaring in skies, as against being grounded. Now, I don't think I can say that it's more important than to soar in the skies than to be grounded. You cannot do one without the other.
Correct.
So balance between that, balance between blue sky thinking and structured thinking. Free-spirited, unfettered thinking of blue sky as against structured thinking.
Correct.
If you only have one and not the other, then you're not going to get there. Again, a balance between the two.
Right.
Balance between being hands-on and giving autonomy. There are times when you have to be hands-on, and you have to have the ability and the mindset of doing that, even if you're a CEO. But there are also, of course, times when and many more, that you have to give autonomy. So balance between that. So balance is, I think, balance, patience, some of the stuff that young people may not be inherently attracted towards. But I found over the journey that I've had, these are the qualities that are important. There are a number of other qualities that are always talked about, and I will not get into them. But I think these are the qualities which are underrated, and that's why I wanted to emphasize.
Well said, well said. And on that note, and your amazing thoughts of balance and patience are critical for any kind of work that we are doing in our own lives as well. Thank you, Samir, for talking to me. Thank you for talking to me about your own amazing journey and all your achievements. I must say, despite achieving so much in your conversation, you've been incredibly modest. Thank you for sharing your own personal story. Thank you for talking to me about the 3 levels of leadership and then adding on the next 2 leadership levels as well. And I loved your one comment, which was give credit and take the blame. I think that's a philosophy some other time I must talk to you in more detail about. Thank you also for talking to me about your perspectives on valuation, your perspectives on investments, and your perspectives on startups. Thank you again, and good luck.
Thank you, Ashutosh. I really enjoyed this conversation. All the best to you. You're doing an amazing job, and all force be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.